Okay, so let's pick up your career when you're in Brazil. So you are a fifth generation journalist. You had grew up in France and moved to Brazil, where you promptly started a career as a journalist and eventually made your way to publisher and really eventually made your way to entrepreneur as a publisher in the tech space. And things were going beautifully for you. You were doing great. And suddenly, the Brazilian government changed the terms of the deal. Can you tell us how that happened and what you did to resolve that issue?
Well, what you're referring to is I launched Brazil's first computer newspaper magazine, whatever you want. It was newspaper format. It was really a magazine. It was in Portuguese, but it had an English name called Data News. And this was in 1974, which was under the junta. There was a military dictatorship in Brazil, and the classic junta, we had the head of the army, head of the air force, head of the navy, who together were ruling the country. And this was the era of mini computers. So we were moving from mainframes to minis. For the first time, people in business, because no homes had mini computers, but people in business had kind of access to computers and could actually see them, and they didn't have to go through all these people with the code labs and all of this. And it was a very exciting time. And most of these computers in Brazil were bought by multinationals. Data General, DEC, Wang, those were the brands of the day.
Those were the producers of the technology.
Yeah, they were American.
And who were the customers?
Well, the customers were corporations, mostly multinationals, some of the larger Brazilian, Petrobras or whatever, some of the larger Brazilian companies, and they were really selling really well. The economy in Brazil, even in those days, was booming, and everything was going swimmingly. I had plenty of advertising for my new magazine, great distribution. We were the only people in town doing this. And then one day, literally out of the blue, because that's the way a military dictatorship works, they published an edict in the newspaper that said that computing was a matter of national security. And that's, from that moment on, computers could not be imported anymore unless they had a special license, and that computers had to be manufactured in Brazil by Brazilians, which made absolutely no sense whatsoever. No Brazilians were making computers. And even if you could make computers in Brazil, it would take a while to ramp up. But they had closed the door literally from that day on. So in a matter of hours, I lost all my advertisers. So everybody stopped advertising because they couldn't sell anything. And there was this really promising magazine, which was funded by an angel investor. I didn't know that there was such thing as an angel investor. Somebody gave me money. Today, you would call that person an angel investor. And I had no more business.
So you had a plan to resolve it. You sort of had one shot that you thought of. And what did you end up doing? And there's even to reach this person was pretty extraordinary.
Well, one of the things that was really hard to buy in Brazil was telephones. Very few people had telephones. And you couldn't just apply for a telephone and get a telephone. You had to buy one. And telephones in those days were prohibitive. They cost $2,000, which I couldn't afford, most people couldn't afford. So my angel investor had a telephone. And I had installed a telephone in my office, and we all my staff, and we used this one telephone to call everybody, et cetera. So when he pulled the rug on me, which is actually not a nice way to say, when he said, listen, I can't continue to finance this because there's no more business, which was completely understandable, I said to him, well, that's great, Fernando, no problem, but let me use the telephone for 24 hours. No questions asked. I could make any phone calls. I'm going to make international phone calls, so be ready. There'll be a stiff bill. And I had sent my magazine to a gentleman called Patrick McGovern, who is really renowned.
This guy?
Yeah. Oh, you've got a picture of Pat. Great. Extremely renowned to this day, a fantastic entrepreneur, really kind of the inventor of the computer press, if you like, created Computer World and had last time, when magazines were still around, he had like over 100 around the world and all this. But in any case, I had sent him a copy of Data News just to say, hey, there's a a magazine now in Brazil that also deals with computers. And he has sent me back a letter saying, welcome to the world of computer publishing. And if you ever need me, feel free to call. And so I remembered I had this letter in my drawer, and I pulled out the letter, and the phone number was in his office in Boston. So I called the office in Boston. They told me that he was in Europe, and I could find him in London. They gave me a phone number. Long story short, I eventually found him in Munich. And the clock is ticking. It's like
Hour number, so it's like the show 24.
Yeah, it's like 3 hours time pulling the plug on my life.
Yeah.
So I found him in Munich, and it was November, which in Brazil is hot. Brazil is always hot, but November is really hot. And in Munich, it was snowing. And he said, I introduced myself, and I said, here's what's going on, and I'm going to have to shut down the magazine, but maybe you're interested in working with me. And he said, well, what's the temperature? And I said, well, it's like 110. He said, well, it's starting to snow here, and I think I'll come down. How about if I came down for New Year's Eve? And I said, fine. He said, then okay, I'll come down, and you have to have a business plan. And I said, of course, I'll have anything you want. I had no idea what a business plan was. Sure enough, to my surprise, he actually followed through. He actually came down, and we sat. It was the day before New Year's Eve, and we sat at the pool of the Copacabana Palace. Any of you have gone to Rio? That's the really great hotel on Copacabana Beach. And we sat there, and in a matter of a few hours, I had sold my company to Pat McGovern, and he had made me the vice president for Brazil, and we were going to expand throughout Latin America. We had these big plans, et cetera, and it was fantastic.
So this origin story, as you'll see, sets Eric on quite a media trajectory. You end up coming to the United States in what year? After that, you've had lots of success in Latin America, moved IDG all over the continent, and then you come in what year to the United States?
I came to the West Coast, to Menlo Park, in 1986.
So it's the mid-'80s, the technology boom is underway, it's the era of the desktop computer, the personal computer. You end up at IDG, you become a significant publishing executive, and eventually you get recruited away by Ziff Davis. And we should explain to everybody that Ziff Davis was the main competitor to IDG in these two enormous businesses that were very focused on tech press and niche magazines. But Ziff Davis, now very focused, had a magazine that... Tell us, so you get to Ziff Davis in 91?
No, I get to Ziff Davis in 1989.
1989.
As publisher of PC Magazine.
As the publisher of PC Magazine, and become the CEO of the company, president?
President a year later, CEO 6 months after that.
Okay. So Eric is now running this tech media business, which is a unique vantage point in 1991. We should remind everyone that in 1991, there was still no commercial internet. And in fact, your major customers were whom?
Well, it depends what you mean. I mean, the audience.
Not the audience, your advertisers.
Well, these were boom days. It was the advent of the IBM PC, which was a clonable computer. So you had clones everywhere. Everyone was making clones of the IBM PC, which was actually maybe not something that IBM had ever imagined, but it was a brilliant move on the part of the industry because it allowed computers to become incredibly cheap. Very flexible, and there was also a merger of specs between what used to be the home computer, like the Commodore 64, for instance, which were kind of toys for the house.
Right.
And
proprietary.
And proprietary, and then the computer in the office. So the computer in the office and the computer at home were the same machine. That's unheard of. So there was this incredible boom time. PC Magazine in 1991, just as an example, had become the 9th largest magazine in the United States by revenue. So if you imagine you have people and money and time and
Sports Illustrated.
Sports Illustrated, and suddenly in 9th position is this kind of techie book that specializes in doing product reviews of, with a lot of technology behind it. Just shows you what, the importance of that, what had happened. So Ziff Davis had grown much bigger than IDG in the United States. because Ziff Davis was riding that wave of the personal computer, and IDG was, to a large degree, still addressing the IT marketplace and the enterprise marketplace, which was really two different.
The business
The
market.
business market.
It was business versus consumer.
Yeah. As it turns out, businesses found incredible uses for the PC, but we should remember that first, it was a personal computer. It was meant for you, and it turns out that it became an incredible business machine. So we were at the center of technology. We considered ourselves, I also ran all the big computer trade shows, like Comdex and Network Plus Interop and all this. And I thought of ourselves, and certainly thought of myself, as being part of the technology world. I rubbed shoulders with everybody who was, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, everybody who was developing businesses. I never went to a media conference. I didn't know who the people at Condé Nast or Hearst or Time Inc. I had no idea who these people were. We were part of the technology industry.
So this is an important point, because today we think of the technology and the media businesses as being completely intersected, right? I mean, Microsoft has Xboxes and millions and millions of homes. Apple sells tons of content. We don't make these distinctions anymore. As you look back on 91, 92, 93, and weren't attending media conferences, did you think about how these businesses would merge, or did you really just say, hey, I'm in the tech business?
Well, we like I said, we thought we were the tech business. We, in fact, the back of PC Magazine, because we had many other magazines, but the back, you had programs which eventually we allowed you to access our servers and download them. So we were the first, before the internet. Remember, the internet wasn't developed until later. We ran networks that were accessible to the public on CompuServe. I had one on Prodigy. Remember Prodigy?
Yes.
I had one on Prodigy. Remember that Prodigy was a joint venture between Sears and...
Should we do a little show of hands of Prodigy? Not everybody, though.
Right.
As you see, CompuServe, again, not everybody. So it's interesting.
Right, and so you could access programs, utilities, little spreadsheets, whatever, that we published on PC Magazine, that you could actually go and download them. We had our servers. Our servers were PCATs, the very first big boxes like this.
Well, the notion of a server was very new.
Yeah.
So all this language you're hearing, all this technical jargon, was really completely not understood by others. Now, while you were at Ziff Davis and the business was booming, as we kind of move along here, you had an opportunity to meet these guys. This is Jerry Yang and David Filo, who founded Yahoo in a dorm room in 1994 at Stanford, and actually did not raise any institutional capital or growth, other than money from themselves until 1995. And at that point, they'd only raised $2 million. When did you meet these guys?
So I had a number of businesses on the West Coast. I had magazines and trade shows and market research companies. But in 1994, 93, 94, 95, it was clear that there was such thing as the web, and that all of these attempts at having online services, CompuServe, and all the things that we talked about, were going to be overtaken by the web. And I felt
when you say it was clear, sir, I don't know that Steve Case would have said it was clear that in this year, 1994 or 95, Steve Case, former CEO of AOL, founder really of AOL, and running a large online service. Prodigy and CompuServe were online services, not on the open web. To you, it was clear. Why did you feel that way?
Well, first of all, it's understandable why Steve thinks that way, and
sure.
He was running a very profitable, great business. It was clear that what the web was bringing to you was universal access. I did not have to sign to AOL and then separately sign on to CompuServe. I could have access to everything that was on the web universally. I didn't have to pay for it. It was really open source. It was created by the government, and the government just gave it to us. The same way that the government gave us GPS. In those days, those were great things that the government was doing. And businesses like Yahoo, where there was many businesses that were starting up to take advantage Netscape with the browser, and Yahoo with directory, which then became search, and all kinds of other things. And so because we were sitting right in the middle of the technology industry, we were reporting on these things. That was the beauty of it. I had journalists, I had reporters, and we were literally on the cutting edge. And it was, I don't know if it became clear that it would be of the magnitude that it became, but it was certainly clear that something important was going on.
So because of your sort of position in the editorial, the content business, you and your relentless focus on that at the company, you begin to develop a worldview of changes that were occurring. And it is around this point when you meet Jerry and David.
Right. So I wanted to be much closer to the community that was seeing the web as a big thing, and came across. It wasn't circumstantial. It was deliberate. I met pretty much everybody, and one of the teams that I met early on was David and Jerry. And David and Jerry, as you mentioned, were in the business at the time. The business was in Mountain View, above the traditional pizza restaurant or Asian restaurant or whatever. And that was a business. And they were in the business of classifying the web.
You go to their office.
Yeah, I go to their office.
How many people are there?
Six people. They had just raised money from Sequoia. Mike Moritz,
right,
who's a great VC, was kind of their first institutional investor. And their job is to take submissions. Everyone is submitting them to them websites. Look at my website. I have this website. The notion of the website was brand new. And David and Jerry, who had no background in bibliography or anything like this, would take these websites. Okay, this belongs to autos. Okay, rentals, or this becomes to cleaning services. Okay, homes. Whatever. So they literally were classifying this manually.
Doing it themselves.
Doing it themselves. Yeah.
Doing it themselves, and it's an important. And what's happening is they're starting to get more and more inbound traffic.
Right. So we can talk about how I got to invest in it, but
we will.
Yeah, but I always remember one of the first board meetings with Yahoo where the big problem was that they could only handle 5,000 entries a day, and they were getting 50,000 entries a day. So how are you going to automate this? How are you going to make this into, where's the technology going to come from? And that's when they decide that they need to raise money to have engineers and tackle this problem, which they did.
So you had this idea. Mike Moritz had invested in the company. You thought you should invest in the company. You thought there was a unique opportunity for Ziff Davis.
As a strategic partner.
Yes. Now talk about this notion of as a strategic partner. Why did you think you were strategic?
Well, because we were the media company serving technology, and the feeling was that Yahoo, while it had to become a technology company, was really kind of a media company, which is kind of an interesting thing to say, because over the years, there's always been that tension at Yahoo and in many internet companies, where are we a technology company or are we a content company?
And we'll see this theme throughout,
exactly.
I would say, your whole portfolio.
So I really hit it off. We became good friends, and they really thought that we at Ziff Davis could help them tremendously figure out the content side.
But when you sat down with Jerry and David, do you think they knew they were a media company?
Well, I don't know that they expressed it that way, but they knew that they were dealing with content. And there was an early notion that maybe advertising was going to be important to them, although nothing was defined at that time.
But they were actually thinking about it.
Well, they were, now they had money from a VC. So
right.
The first thing the VC says is, what about monetization?
Oh, those were you never say that now, though, do you?
No, because now I'm an early stage investor, so I have
things have changed. So you actually successfully convinced them, sort of based on your own background, Ziff Davis's importance as a company, that you will invest in the company, and you even come to terms with them, as I recall.
Well, we had come to terms. I was going to invest, or Ziff Davis was going to invest $5 million. And we were in the process of exchanging papers and all of that.
And then, maybe we'll come back to this, But it just as an aside, Eric cut a deal with these guys, or maybe Masa cut a deal with these guys to produce a magazine. This was a monthly magazine that grew
Yeah.
very
No,
quickly.
I did that.
You
Yeah,
did this
yeah,
deal.
yeah.
They got to a very large circ base very quickly. And the reason you would get this magazine is so that you could find websites to go to the next month. That was like the way you would find cool websites.
We had 1.5 million circulation in that magazine.
Yeah.
Which was huge.
You think people, because this was kind of the most efficient way to get curated websites.
Yeah.
So.
Well, plus the pictures were cool.
Yeah, the pictures were. Well, no, it's true. You see kind of the emergence of fan culture here. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that media culture and communication students can get into. I think this would be a great paper, by the way. I think going back over these magazines these are priceless. However, things changed for you in terms of Ziv Davis. Tell everyone what happened.
Well, at about the same time we're talking about,
Yes.
I sold the business years because he was our business to SoftBank. Masayoshi-san was also extremely well known in Japan, a good friend of ours. And I had known Masa for many years because he was our licensee in Japan. So he published the Japanese editions of a lot of our magazines. And he had expressed interest in buying Ziv Davis early. Unfortunately, Forsman Little bought the company. But Forsman Little did not want the trade shows. So we sold the trade shows separately to Masa. Then he went and bought Comdex. And then less than a year later, we then sell him the rest of the company. It's a long story. And then we put everything back together. But the first thing that I wanted Masa to do is to fly with me back to California and meet Jerry and David and Mike Moritz, because I wanted to save this deal. I thought we have to have this deal.
So, I mean, that's interesting. There's a lot of things going on at this business, and you're focused on this one investment transaction. Masa's version of the story, by the way, is he said to you, Eric, I don't have time to read all these websites that you're studying. Just tell me which one you want to do a deal with, and let's do one. So
Yeah.
does that sound semi-familiar? Is that
probably,
revisionist history?
Yeah. Well, no. I mean, the fact is that we were in the process of doing this investment, and
Right.
it was becoming his investment because the company was being bought by him.
Right.
So it was probably a combination of the two. Anyway,
So you fly back. You're ready to give Yahoo $5 million. That's what you agreed to.
Mm-hmm.
What does Masa say?
Well, so we meet there, we stay, and after a few days, Masa says, "Okay, I completely understand why Eric would want to make this investment. However, I really like what you guys are doing, and I'd like to invest $100 million." And Jerry said, "Oh, Masa, that's flattering. Thank you very much. It's great. $100 million. Oh my God. However, I don't need $100 million." And Masa famously said, "Jerry, everybody needs $100 million." And we struck a deal where SoftBank would own a third of the company at the IPO. So whatever the IPO price was going to be, we would own a third, which turned out to be a little bit more than $100 million. And then,
we're going to talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah. So actually, it turned out to be about $338 million. All in, SoftBank invested in this business, and they had a joint venture in Japan.
Yeah.
And the result of that is non-trivial. As it turns out, because of Eric's visiting Yahoo above a pizza parlor, Masayoshi-san gets to invest a significant amount of money, but he gets a 30x investment return very quickly. And so
that's just in the U.S.
And that's just in the U.S. Yeah. So you must have been popular with him, I would think.
Yeah, I was good friends with Masa. He was on my board. I was on his board for a little bit, and then I became kind of a venture partner at SoftBank.
Right. So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
You now become. This is the birth of your venture career, I would say. Is that fair to say? I mean, you're not really going to be an executive anymore at this point in 1996, 7.
No. I continued to run Ziv Davis and ZDNet and all of the affiliated companies until we took them public, and then we sold the whole business. So until 1999.
Oh, okay.
So but again, I was at the center of technology. So we had all these people saying, I'm going to start this business. I'm going to do this. It's great. And I would go to Masa, and Ron Fisher, he's our partner here in the US, and I would say, GeoCities, US Web, all these businesses, we should put money in them. And at first, we would invest SoftBank's treasury money. Eventually, we started these venture
You're talking,
funds.
let's just be clear. What you're saying is you took cash out of the bank
Yeah.
and invested the money.
Yeah, it was just out of,
Just money lying in the checking account.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's cool. And then, this is like a pretty, literally, you're getting to invest in tons and tons of these companies, and eventually you formalize this in market volatility context of a fund. Now, this is a quote that you made as there began to be some market volatility in March. And you...
it's called the correction.
Yes, this is an important thing, and I think it's really worth tracing this whole moment in internet history, because you put a stake in the ground, you were speaking not just for yourself, but also for SoftBank, and you really saw through this 5-year period, say 95 to 2000, a sea change in the way everyone was going to do business. And you were sitting on the Yahoo board, so Yahoo's growth was explosive in that period. How would you now characterize this 95 to this moment before we talk about the bubble and everything?
Well, it's the birth of the internet. I mean, this is where the internet is literally accessible to everybody, where everyone can just start a business on the internet. This is the first generation of e-commerce, first generation of digital media, first generation of everything that we know today. You were part of this.
I was part of this.
Right?
I've got the gray hair to show for it.
And it was one of the most fantastic periods that anybody could live through, because literally society, the economy, politics, pretty much everything was being changed in a short period of time.
So how did you spend I just want to drill down a little bit, because how did you spend your time taking all this in? Like, what were your days like? What did you do?
Well, I was running a business that had hundreds of million dollars, $1.5 billion in revenue, so I was busy.
You were busy running
I was busy. But busy, I was meeting with everybody. Those were my customers. A lot of the money that was invested by venture capitalists ended up in advertising in my magazines. So that was it was a direct route to.
It sure did. I bet you feel differently about that now that you're on the venture side.
Well, we tell them not to spend money in marketing.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Things have changed on that front. It's true. You did grow heavily from venture-backed advertising. All right. Well, as everyone can see, this comment was made on March 9th, 2000. And then in 99, NASDAQ over time. And what you could see here, and by the way, if we looked at it for a longer period of time, essentially NASDAQ was creeping up slowly the whole time of its history, and you start to see in 95 and 96, it starts to increase more. It's not quite as perfect a curve as everyone remembers it. There were some jumps. But then in 99, you start to see this extraordinary change in the marketplace. And Eric made that quote literally the day before the highest moment on this graph.
I should have sold.
And in that quote, he talked about a 15 to 20% correction. But in fact, the correction was way more substantial than any of us could have dreamed of. And if you really look, there's this gap in SoftBank's investments, which, by the way, were quite successful at the outset. Then there's a middle period where they almost stop investing. And now you've invested in Zynga. I mean, there's been Associated Content. There have been a number of wins subsequently in the next era. But this period that you described of being the world, we could change everything, that history, I think, has been suppressed by the history of this curve. and most people thinking that first wave of internet companies kind of accomplished nothing, and they were all overvalued. How do you feel about that now, in retrospect?
Well, part idiotic at having invested in some of these businesses, which were, we basically we were putting millions of dollars into companies that had presentations. Um, um, should I remind people of Webvan, for instance? I mean,
We should. We need to explain what Webvan was if we're going to remind. These are people who were born. Well, they were toddlers maybe during Webvan.
Webvan was a company that was founded by the founder of Borders, Louis Borders, and
Pat Borders.
Yes,
And he hired the guy from Accenture.
right, and they wanted to deliver groceries using technology, so it was home delivery. It's what Fresh Direct is. None of these businesses, by the way, were bad ideas. Today, all of these businesses live in one way or the other. And he raised $100 million on a piece of paper.
Yeah, and then way more than that before it was over.
Yeah.
So, I think,
and we were part of it.
$800 million over time.
Yeah, and he had nothing to show for it. Nothing, except there was some conveyor belt somewhere.
It's true. It's true. I
so
don't know that they delivered any food. I mean, it's really, literally, they never had customers.
Food.
Right.
They never got close to food.
Yeah.
But Webvan was kind of an example, but there were many others. So I felt somewhat idiotic looking back. What were we thinking? But at the same time, even looking back, I never wavered in the sense that no matter what, this is a hiccup. It could be a 10-year hiccup.
This long-term believer comment.
Yeah, exactly.
You still felt this way.
I've stayed in the marketplace. I continue to invest. In fact, some of the best investments always come when you have a down market.
In that trough.
Yeah.
So, but you remember, I mean, did that take a toll, I mean, psychologically for you?
And in New York, I remember I was kind of investing. I was the New York partner at SoftBank, and I know you have a session later this week or next week on Silicon Alley. Silicon Alley was wiped out. That was the end. We could hopefully talk a little bit about the situation today, which is completely different.
We're pretty excited to talk about that.
Yeah. But Silicon Alley, Silicon Alley was based on the premise that money from Boston and money from the Bay Area was going to come and finance crazy people in New York. And the moment that the bubble burst, that money fled. There was no more money. They went back to Boston, they went back to San Francisco, and there was few exceptions. Myself, of course, Fred Wilson, people at RRE, First Round, but there was a small group of people who were kind of like stranded. We were here, everyone had gone. And luckily we continued to back New York companies.
So we'll get into that. Now you did back a series of interesting companies that deserve mention: Kick Apps, as we said, Associated Content, and other Web 2.0 companies. But let's start to look carefully at this particular company because you played multiple roles here. And I think it's emblematic of a next generation of internet companies. The Huffington Post began in 2005, and they began with friends and family money, started by Ken, I guess, and Ariana largely, and Jonah Peretti, and you were observing this from the beginning, I assume, even though you were not an investor. You were paying attention to this business, and about 14 months after they began, you led the first institutional round. Why would you invest in the Huffington Post?
Well, I was introduced to Kenny by a common friend. By the way, it's not totally fair to have Breitbart here, but that's another story.
Jonah would say that it's fair to have
Okay,
Breitbart.
all right. Well, let's not go through that.
So,
but anyway, so I was introduced to Kenny by a friend, and Kenny at that point was thinking he wasn't exactly sure of raising an A round. He didn't. He wasn't looking forward to making the rounds of the VCs and all of that. And so he and I spent some time. And I liked the product before. And after meeting him and meeting Ariana, I loved the product. I mean, it was the right news product for its time. They understood more than anybody else that there was a sea change going on in the delivery of news, in how news, what people thought of news, that on one hand, blogging was giving access to many more points of view, some unfiltered, a lot of them unfiltered, by pretty much anybody, and that the journalist as the gatekeeper was going to go away like the dodo. You know, basically, not to say that there won't be journalists, but this idea that I'm the journalist and I'm going to tell you the news when I'm good and ready to tell you the news, that was all going to go away. And the Huffington Post was the embodiment of that. So you had, on one hand, you had the bloggers. On the other hand, you had, at the beginning, a lot of content aggregation, which was allowed and enabled by technology, so that you could cover a lot more information, a lot more news in real time. And then you had, with Jonah, who's the original CTO of the Huffington Post, he now runs a business that we're investors in called BuzzFeed, very successful. Then you had a lot of technology, and the technology allowed an incredible amount of productivity, that you could have one journalist literally cover dozens of stories all at once, and that the distribution of that information was, if not completely automated, at least a good part automated.
Okay, so let's take this theme by theme, because I think that was an excellent overview. First of all, blogging was not a very mature, how can we say, model at this period in 2005. In fact, blogs are a fairly new technology relative to the whole history of the internet. And professional blogs, Nick Denton and Jason Calacanis, for example, were among the first people who claimed that they would aggregate these professional bloggers and literally only use the internet as a way to publish content. But Ariana had different riffs on that you believed in. So she was heavily criticized at the outset for having a bunch of celebrities produce free content for her. And your feelings about that were like, this is great, I guess, or talk about that.
Well, you know, the idea that it's free is not exactly right. Yes, someone like Alec Baldwin could, when he wanted to, he was under no obligation, or Steve Martin for that matter, or whoever, could write a blog, and that blog could be about whatever they wanted. But it wasn't exactly for free, because in exchange, what we did is we provided them with curation. We provided them with what I would consider to be a healthy environment, because we kept
policed the community,
make sure that the comments were not only appropriate but were on topic, because the biggest problem with message boards and comments is that they get taken over by people who want to talk about something completely different. And we provided them with vast distribution. And so there was a fair, square exchange. And nobody...
Spoken like the former CEO.
No,
generally speaking,
listen,
free is a compensation.
Well,
You're saying it's a barter of something other than money.
Let's say Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who's a blogger on Huffington Post, if we paid her $400, would that matter to her? No. What she wants to make sure is that she's going to be treated with dignity, and that her message, whatever she wants to say, is going to reach the broadest audience possible.
Okay. So anyway, so there you have one riff on the compensation situation. But beyond that, there's a kind of conventional narrative, and we're about to bring Paul up here. There's a conventional narrative about Huffington Post that, first there was a celebrity kind of blogging, then it moved kind of the left, and then they started putting kittens up and all kinds of celebrity news, and that's how they grew. And that's kind of the conventional narrative leading all the way up through a transaction to AOL. But the truth is that there were multiple components in this thing making it grow. So before we explore that with Paul.
Can I answer that for a second?
Yes, please.
This was a blank sheet of paper. We had no obligation to any convention except good journalism. We had no obligation to any legacy. And why is it that you can't mix celebrity news with politics? Why is it that you have to have, the highfalutin New York Times and the down market New York Post? Why can't you combine them? And if you don't want celebrity news, you don't have to click on that. So I think our model was proven to be the right model in the sense that we could aggregate the largest audience possible, which made it into a commercial enterprise. Ultimately, we want to have a commercial enterprise.
Right. So that's true on the content side, and I think there's some, but there were other businesses trying to do what you just described that didn't grow nearly at the rate that Huffington Post did. And so what I'd like to do is, I'm going to bring Paul up here. Before we do, we're just going to take a short break. When I teach the rise of internet media, one of the things I think is very important for students to do is to locate themselves in this historical narrative. Have you been on Huffington Post? Raise your hand if you've ever been on Huffington Post. Good. Please turn to your neighbor and tell them about your earliest memory of the Huffington Post. Take a minute to do that, and we'll bring Paul up. All right, everybody. I'm very happy now to have Eric's former colleague at the Huffington Post. Paul was the CTO of the Huffington Post. He's now the CEO of Rebel Mouse, which Eric is an investor in through Lair Ventures. And Paul also runs something called Soho Labs, which is part of the Lair incubator, which is also, by the way, like Code Academy, just across the street here. So I want to talk about this very small part of the front page of Huffington Post today.
Yeah.
And I want you to walk us through. So Paul arrived at Huffington Post in 2007. Eric was a director then and eventually became the CEO in 2009, correct?
Yep.
But you were very involved. You got to know Eric pretty early in this process before he was the CEO, right? What you're looking at here is technology that allows me to see what other people are reading and also just what my general network and individual people are reading. You're familiar with this technology, I assume, those of you who are on Huffington Post. These are the guys who actually invented this. So tell us about the origins of thinking about content this way.
Yeah, I mean, it was in our DNA to think about news as social. I forget, this was released in summer of I'm terrible with the calendar, but it was January of that year that we were introduced, Facebook Connect was a product
That's
you could
08.
use. So that was January 08, and through Eric and Ken, we found a great contact at Facebook who is Josh Ellman. He's now at Greylock and an advisor to Rebel Mouse and a great friend. And he said, social should be integrated into every news site. And we totally agreed. And he said, I've been taking this to Wall Street Journal and to a bunch of others, but they just don't see it. And this was obvious to us that this was absolutely essential. It was a perfect match. And the idea was, and it's still not really replicated anywhere else. It's a very hard technology to build at scale. And the idea is if you have 1,000 friends on Facebook and you follow a couple thousand people on Twitter, who are those 50 or 100 people who are also on Huffington Post? So this of your popular in your network is not a general network. It's very specific to you.
To your social graph.
Exactly. And it was very powerful. There's a term called narrowcasting, which I guess describes it. The idea that you could take that group of people who were also really into the HuffPost and you could engage further with them there. Before we had this, and you would meet people here too, by the way. So it would be, in the past, if Jonah Peretti commented on an article, we got massive numbers of comments. So why would he do that? It would just go into the flood of people he didn't know. When we launched this, he started to do really clever comments, knowing that the people that he knew would see it because of this. So,
So,
It-
so it was a way for you to have the broader conversation, but you knew that you would also have the narrow conversation. So the value here, and remember, when we sold the business, we were doing 5 million comments a month.
Well, so let's talk about this. This is the point I wanted to make. Prior to this, Huffington Post was known to be a site with a tremendous number of unique visitors, but not very much stickiness. People were coming, but they weren't necessarily hanging out. Talk about how the metrics changed from the kind of classic media business, the Yahoo media business, the PC Magazine business of getting people to engage as a result of this media. Do you remember kind of just roughly what the trajectory change was?
this launched, I tend to think abstractly, and our growth was always like this curve, where you'd grow massively, a big news event on top of new technology we'd build, and then that news event would go, and then you'd come down off that curve and battle, because then the new technology was in place. And I had a metaphor constantly that it was like a sailboat where we were constantly building much bigger sails. So the wind was the news, and every time the wind blew, we caught more of that. This was essential to it because we weren't just capturing a broad audience, which is, I learned a lot from my year after acquisition at AOL. And we had at HuffPost a very special group of users. It was really the top influencers. We were very proud. If you looked at Facebook IDs on connected users, we had a tremendous amount of the first 100 employees of Facebook that had connected to this. So the people that were then getting pulled in had tremendous reach themselves. So the sharing on HuffPost just took off. And because search follows social, we were ahead on search already, but it got amplified even further because this stuff was getting shared like never before.
Which improved the search.
Yes.
Is really your point, right?
Yeah.
So very early, I mean, in 2008, we had gone through a MySpace and YouTube velocity. Facebook was cresting and starting to surpass MySpace. Social networking was a phrase.
Well, YouTube started in 2008. 2008.
No.
No?
YouTube started earlier than that.
It did?
And,
Okay.
and the big year was 2006 for them. They got acquired in 06 or 07.
yeah,
but
sorry,
but
yeah.
the point is, the word social media is out there, but there were no business models associated with social media. So you guys are very early to Twitter and Facebook integration. Your page views change. But so what? How was it that there was a revenue model associated
Well, we
with
created
this?
one. We invented
So
one.
talk about that.
Yeah, and it's called social advertising. And you see it, BuzzFeed is entirely built on social advertising today. You see it on Forbes, and it's starting to see it appear. And basically what social advertising is making the brand as a publisher, turning brands into storytellers, which is, by the way, exactly what they do on television. The reason why we still see a lot of advertising on TV, even though the audience has moved on, is because that's, to this day, really the only place you can tell a story and I can grab you emotionally, I can make you cry, I can make you really want to buy my product. It's hard to do this in a banner ad on the internet.
Although but you were a Yahoo director, and you saw that Yahoo had, I mean, really the largest velocity of
Sure.
advertising revenue growth.
Don't take me wrong. I'm not saying that banners don't work.
Right.
I'm just saying that and they definitely serve a purpose. They make people buy product. It's hard to tell a story, is my point. So social advertising comes into it. And social advertising is you're basically telling the brand that they have to be in the content business. So the importance of having social news that is shareable, that people want to pass on and have a discussion on, creates a platform for this social advertising to really take hold. And we were at the very beginning of doing this. I'm not exactly sure where AOL is with this. I know they discontinued that program for a while. Mm-hmm. But we then continued to do this with Jonah over at BuzzFeed. And it works incredibly well.
But it's interesting, right? AOL makes this acquisition, right? And in part, what they're getting is this technology to run social advertising. And then maybe because they don't have the DNA to sell it, whatever happens to the transaction is, I think probably not worth us talking
Well, it wasn't a
about.
big part of the revenues.
It
My
wasn't.
point.
Oh,
No, my
okay.
point is that we were just experimenting
Experimenting.
and testing it, and we're having some success with people like HP and IBM and GE and people like that. But a big part of the future of advertising in digital form is social advertising.
Okay, so this then leads to a portfolio at Lehrer that includes e-commerce businesses and lots of other things.
Well, we
but
have a
lot of companies, and some of them are media companies. And I really want to talk about the media companies. So clearly, this strand that we've just been discussing is filtering through how you guys see investments. So can you talk about, you're investing in media companies that will mature. You're running a media company that will not mature for till years from now. It always takes, even in internet times, it takes years to build a solid media company. What are those media companies? What do they do? What do you look for as you think about building them?
Well, if you think about today looking forward, so we're early stage investors. We invest at the seed level. We invest in teams of people that, 3 or 4 people, et cetera. So yes, there's many years. So we have to be thinking, okay, what's going to happen 2 or 3 years down the road? Today, it's very clear that the center of gravity is mobile and social. And you have to develop on mobile first. Obviously, if you have other businesses, then you can go to mobile. If you were to start a business today in the media business, you would want to start a mobile business, and you would want to use
But Paul,
social.
is that what you did?
Well, I don't
Was
think
Rebel
Rebel
Mouse-
Mouse as a media, I don't think of it as a media
Oh, you don't
company.
think of it as a media company?
I think of
Do
it as
you,
a
Eric?
social technology company that could empower media companies.
It has a lot of content, so you could say because it has a lot of content, it's a media company, but he doesn't employ journalists and editors or content people.
I think that would be the defining thing for me. If Rebel Mouse takes a turn and we hire editors, then that would make us a media company.
What about if you end up running advertising? Are you a media company?
We are planning on never running display, but running sponsored content, but much more like Google does it through AdSense. We want to build a scale. I'd like Rebel Mouse to build a scalable platform for sponsored content. We already have brands like GE, IBM, Oakley, and we have celebrities like Ashton Kutcher and influencers like Kevin Rose and Chris Sacca. And I'd like them to be able to find each other, accept the sponsorships, choose the good content. Every brand wants to be a publisher. Rebel Mouse makes them a good publisher, and they're excited when they see their pages.
So let's talk about, so this is interesting.
I
Right? You
love
see it
that
being
it's
like
a
Google. Is Google, do you not see Google as a media company?
Well, I love the confusion of where tech and media is this blurred line that is hard to understand. But I think that defining Rebel Mouse as a media company straight out, or Google as a media company, or Twitter as a media company, having the debate over are they becoming media companies, is that something they're absorbing, is awesome, but it's a very blurry line there.
YouTube is more of a media company. Google is not a media company. So the way YouTube is going, YouTube is now trying to convince people to produce, and
Curated video content.
We have companies like Bedrocket that
Sure.
does that, right? Full screen, we have a bunch of companies that do that. So they're becoming a media platform. They haven't taken the step yet to develop content of their own. Maybe one day they will. Google is really not a media company. It doesn't curate content. It's all done through technology. So they are not a media company.
So
Even
for
though
you,
adverti-
algorithmic selection and curation in the absence of human intervention makes it not media.
Probably. I might change my mind tomorrow. But
Yes. Let's pause to explore that a little bit. I mean, to Paul's point, you like the blurriness.
Yeah.
It almost makes sense to love the blurriness since we have these kinds of conversations with stunning regularity, and And it's hard to know. And it's hard to know. So when you think of having a media culture and communication department as an example, and this maybe is a natural transition to my final question as we get ready for student questions. Education today, higher education, is it important?
What's the level of higher? Is that an undergrad
Let's
degree
say-
or
let's say
a
college
master's?
and graduate school.
I know what you said
Graduate.
the other day, so remember this, there's a room full of students
No,
here.
no. Paul, that's okay. That's okay. It's all right. Yeah, you're right. It might be bad for our business model, Paul.
It
But
was really great for me to come in this building because I did that for 4 years. I was a Gallatin student, and then I was a graduate student at ITP. So lately, so my thing to all of you is if you're not having the time of your life, like, oh my God, this is going to end on me, I can't believe it's going to end, then don't be here. If it's work, if it's struggle, if it's stress, and you're not having fun, you should totally not, like, save your money. Go. I haven't seen any job reference in like the last 4 years, unless it's like a side comment about, and they dropped out of Princeton to go to start this up, or they just came out of Stanford, like some little side comment like that, totally non-essential to the hire. I never see anyone check where you went. I don't even read where you went when we're hiring. It doesn't matter if it's for the job that you're
Eric, do you agree?
Well, yeah, it's funny because my daughter who's here, who's at Columbia Business School, we had this conversation before she decided to go to Columbia Business School, and not that I would have changed her mind. I think it's a great thing. I'm with Paul, which is anything you do in life, whether you're in higher education or at work, if you wake up in the morning and it's not the greatest thing in your life, just don't do it. And if it's the greatest thing in your life, you're going to get a lot out of it. But education today is changing. It's changing.
Yeah, it's changing. There's no question. I'd like to show you a little bit of data. It's just, it's probably more than directional, since what we did was we took a list of the New York City Lehrer portfolio CEOs, and just, for the purposes of investigation, tried to understand maybe if they went to college. And it turns out that 96% of your founders have a college degree.
I'm just not positive that 10 years from now, that stat will be the same.
Okay.
I'm seeing more and more
Right.
people like Josh Miller at Branch say, forget it, I'm out of Princeton. and
Sure,
I'm gonna
sure.
go do
Charles
this."
Foreman is in this
There's-
portfolio. There are people, clearly we both know.
And for the record, I met Jonah Peretti at ITP at NYU. So, but that connection was valuable because I was having a ridiculously good time.
Right.
So, so I'm not saying it's not
No,
worth it.
I'm not suggesting you're not.
Are you-
I just want to look at some data.
Are you trying to make us look bad or something?
40%. No, I'm not. In no way am I trying to make you look bad. I'm trying to think about reality from kind of how the industry has been trying to think about the evolution of higher education. I mean, as you know, the industry is going through a tremendous disruption economically, and we have a lot to think about with that. There's going to be all kinds of interesting entrepreneurial opportunity. The only other thing I would point out is that, again, just a snapshot, just the New York City people, 60% of these Lehrer CEOs went to quite elite universities.
I have no idea because I never ask. I don't care.
And so just so we're clear, I just want to ask one more question on this. Yesterday, you put out, by the way, this is an awesome opportunity, and you should certainly look it up. Lehrer's looking for a new analyst, and it's a terrific job opportunity. And just so I'm 100% clear, no one will look where that student went to college, or
No,
that
look,
will be an
okay.
irrelevant part
Listen,
of the discussion.
I don't want to, you're putting us a little bit in a bad position here, but let me just tell you a story. When I was the CEO of Ziff Davis, we had thousands of employees, and we hired thousands of employees, so almost on a yearly basis. And I wasn't brought up here. I was actually brought up in England, not in France. And
I'm
you know,
sorry about that. I should have known that.
I was actually accepted at Princeton, but there was no money in the family to go, so I ended up at the Sorbonne, which was really pitiful
And
compared
you
to
have
Princeton.
some, and you have some funny, and you have some very funny stories
Yeah,
about
but
it.
that's not what I was going to say. So
Yeah.
when I was the CEO of Ziff Davis, I had instructions to my HR department to black out the education of the people that we were hiring. And it wasn't so much that...
Wow.
No, but it wasn't so much that I didn't want to know. It's just, it was my observation that it was birds of a feather. That if a department head was hiring somebody and if he had gone to University of Michigan and there was a candidate from the University of Michigan,
Sure.
he wanted to hire that person. And I wanted to hire the best person. I didn't want to hire somebody from the University of Michigan just because the other guy gone to the University of Michigan. So the only solution was to black out the education. So that's it's a misunderstanding as to what is supposed to happen in higher education.
Right. But so the only reason I brought it up, but by the way, this is an important dialogue that, this is not something we can run away from in the university. So you certainly shouldn't feel in any way defensive, or I'm not sitting here trying to defend our business model. Quite frankly, I feel like I'm pretty disruptive within it, But I do think it's interesting that almost everybody who talks about not necessarily needing an education these days has an education.
But hold on, I think we're going off the hook. Maybe we should take questions from the audience.
We are going to take that.
Because it doesn't mean that you don't have an education if you don't go to university.
It certainly doesn't.
Right?
It certainly doesn't.
In fact, we're a big theme of our investment for our investment focus is education. We have about 8 educational companies today. We're looking for more educational companies. We love education. We think education is a continuing thing, that is something that you do on a daily basis in your life until it's...
That's the significant change. That's a very significant change, this notion of lifelong learning. That was not a phrase that even you had.
Yeah.
I certainly didn't have it in college, and you didn't have it.
No.
And it's one that you start to hear a lot more of.
And it should be a
here.
great business model for NYU, and because you now have students for life.
And not just NYU, our students.
Right. But there is something wrong. Okay, I should say the last thing, but there's something wrong in our society when we have bestowed on our students, all higher education students, $1 trillion in debt. That's exactly the amount that college students owe today, right? $1 trillion. Think about this. It's $1 trillion, and people come out of college with $100,000 worth of debt, with some sort of a marketing pitch that they're going to be able to repay it relatively easily. And there was probably a period of time where that was the case. And as you know, today that's not the case.
No, there's no question. And you're absolutely right for bringing that up. I think it's an important discussion to keep having. And I think there's something important about the fact that these guys are investing in education companies and the fact that we're partnering with one of them. You're not an investor in Code Academy, but you could have been.
Yeah.
You could have been.
Great company.
It's certainly an interesting company. Let's start to take some questions from the audience.
Do either of you feel that there is the public accountability that comes with the fourth estate within social news?
The fourth estate?
The press.
The press.
The press.
There's a public accountability.
You know what? There's a crowd of accountability. That if you're trying to say things that are clearly not true or that are offensive or whatever, the crowd just stops it right away.
Do you want to?
Can you
Is there something
elaborate a little?
specific? Is there something specific you're thinking about?
I just find personally that my difficulty with social news and my aversion to social news and my tendency to lean on gimped and dying traditional news outlets is driven by my fear that it's almost so privatized by location, by filter bubbles and just the narrowness of those avenues that I just can't trust it.
But you do.
The filter bubble I can react to. If we had turned the Huffington Post into only what your friends are reading, then I think that could apply. But it's like this literally 300 by 600 was the
Yeah.
maximum space it ever took. So that, making it that you're not seeing everything else, but only seeing your friends, never worked for me as an argument against it. I do think that's something that defined our audience. The people who loved us was like this sort of eager acceptance for the world is changing, and it might be weird sometimes, and there might be a bug sometimes, but I want to see that. And so I think that that isn't for everyone, and that may be something that when you looked at it, it was like, no, I'd rather go back to traditional. But that also became a selling point for us on a revenue side, is we've got the audience who's not only into change, like accepting it, but like embracing it.
Right.
I guess that's it. If the story is unpopular, it can be phased out, I guess, is my concern.
So for me, social news was really great because tech was not that popular on HuffPost. But in my social circle, when there was a new Android release or something like that, it would boom to the top of most read in my network. So it allowed actually above the popularity of the HuffPost audience for me to see things that mattered to me.
Right. If you cared about Somalia,
Yeah,
and you had a network of people who did, you were more likely to see it as a result.
and there are things like in the old classic personalization, you tell it the things you're interested in, my Yahoo style, but you didn't know you were going to be interested in oil spills until the Gulf oil spill, and you're like, I was like not sleeping well because of that thing, like thinking of my kids, it's the end of the oceans, like, and that came through a ton of stuff I found through the people that I admire and respect and follow on Twitter and friends on Facebook, filtering that up instead of the bubble of, if you just read the New York Times front page, then that I think is a bubble because it's what a couple people in a room decided for you to read. And HuffPost, our goal was to create a tremendous amount of content, and then with the personalization, let you find stuff you were going to not see otherwise.
Sure. Right here. Right next to you.
So in terms of monetizing social media, can you talk about how Rebel Mouse is similar or different to Flipboard? And also, is Facebook ahead of the game? Because they announced today that they're partnering with 12 retailers to monetize content from social to those retail sites for e-commerce.
I think of Rebel Mouse as completely different from Flipboard because Flipboard is a reading experience and Rebel Mouse is a publishing platform. It's a social CMS.
So let's pause. Let's just describe. I'll describe Flipboard, but you should describe Rebel Mouse for everyone so they know what we're talking about. Flipboard is an app that takes a series of feeds that you can program and is generally used, I think, only on tablets.
I think it's iPad only.
iPad only and not even iPhone. I'm not sure if it's iPhone. Do people know?
I think they have an iPhone now.
iPad only? Oh, iPhone as well. Okay, so, and you program it and it displays your news in what some people would say, very beautiful and aesthetic ways.
Yes.
Rebel Mouse, on the other hand.
Well, Rebel Mouse, it takes your own, the idea is that blogs, whether it's for your company or for you as an individual, have a series of problems that Rebel Mouse hopes to fix. And one is that the design is hard to get right, and we've gotten overwhelmingly positive feedback that Rebel Mouse lets the content shine and your social efforts shine. It also, blogs get old because you only have a blog post every how often, and then in this day and age, maybe 5 years ago, having a blog post from 3 weeks ago on your front page as the top thing was okay, but now you're starting to feel like, oh no, and you feel guilty, and you stop telling people you have a blog. But you're on Twitter and you're on your Facebook, and you're curating all these things that support your view of the world. As a company, it might be because there's an article that says something that supports your mission, or you're in the press, or it might be as an individual that you're sharing this stuff. And Rebel Mouse brings that together for your page. What we have today is rebelmouse.com/u, and so you can see that, but the goal is to power the open web. So we have Crunch Scroll is a version of TechCrunch that they asked us to do, which we did in a day using that technology. LairVentures.com site is now powered by Rebel Mouse, and you should have a Rebel Mouse site is the pitch. And so For individuals, it'd be $3 a month to power your own domain name, and $12 a month for a company. And there's some differences there.
And we're collecting at the door.
So,
No.
but it's worth pointing out that but you start doing that, you don't need as many. You're not as dependent on advertising.
Well, I love the software as a service model, and I think that for me, I started this because as I ran product and design as well as engineering at HuffPost, and I would be asked like 20 times a week, can you help, give us advice, how do we do the website? And it was really clear to me that that a solution could be built that would allow people to get what they wanted in mass. And it includes the social news filter. You should be able to see the overlap of who else loves this that is with you. And we might not show reading activity of what they read in particular, but that anonymized, here's what's popular in your network on this site. Those things are really hard to build. And I have a team of 20 developers with master's degrees, all of them. Triple.
Very good. Very good. From elite universities. No less.
Only Yale.
Yeah, exactly. Only Stanford. Only electrical engineering. Okay, other questions?
I graduated from NYU actually a couple years ago, and I'm very early in my career, and I work for a large media company right now, and I know this maybe isn't what I want to do, but what do I want to do? And I guess I'm looking and waiting for like an aha moment, like when you said you were working at HuffPost and all these people kept asking you the same question, and that's when you realize this is the thing I should pursue. But I guess what I'm asking is, you guys obviously got to this position because you've had these, I guess, epiphanies, or you've decided, this is the way I want to go. And I guess how do you come to those moments? And I guess you've obviously followed some things before that maybe didn't go anywhere. I guess I just want to know more about how you've followed your passion and become.
The question is, what is the panacea for happiness in life?
Oh, okay. All right.
I guess
But
that
just
is
that.
the thing.
How much time do you guys have? I would only say actually one thing in this respect, which is you have to put yourself in the position that this is going to happen. And if you're, I feel like Dr. Phil, if you're unhappy, if you're unhappy wherever you are, just get out of it. Because nothing's going to happen there, that's for sure. So if you feel, for instance, that things are going to happen more likely in the startup world or in digital worlds, whatever, just go find a job. Might not be the right job, but it'll get you into a whole other environment, and there things will be happening. Dr. Phil.
That's actually very tangible advice. It's make a sector shift. Things will happen as you get into the right playing field. If you're in the wrong playing field, then it's never going to happen for you. I think that's helpful.
And I would just add that I've been thinking about it, that I've been doing all-nighters since I was like 15. And so find what, I don't know, my dad's insomnia passed it on or whatever, but I think of, and sorry to be cheesy, I guess following the Dr. Phil thing, but my grandmother, my mom is Mexican, so from the Mexican side of the family, used to say, what's in heaven is work. And so that was always in my head.
Wow.
And I don't think that anything that I don't think of Rebel Mouse as an aha moment. I think of it as 6 brutal years working with Eric and Jonah and Kenny, and they're insanely, anyone who I've ever found who loved their job works way too hard at it. Like, you can't find a time to email him that he doesn't answer. And that was true of all the founders of HuffPost. So I think the key is to find something that the hours just pass and it's 2 a.m. and you're like, I gotta go to sleep, and then you've found your.
That's a pretty profound answer, given the fact that you have 3 young children. Effectively, what you just said is balance schmalance.
No, I mean.
I don't mean that in a negative way. I also thought that was.
I guess my view of balance is a little bit off, possibly. But you can't get me to go to a dinner. I'm back home at 6 every day. I spend a ridiculous amount of time with my kids. They co-sleep with us, which means that at 2 a.m. there's a musical chairs
they help you
effect.
code.
They jump into our bed and I get out, and that makes me go back to work for an hour. And so I think there's just a weird balance that's possible.
But I just wanted to bring up that point about balance. I also think that, by the way, that's a very New York kind of sensibility that you described there in some ways.
I mean, I think there's a lot of people working like that across the world.
Across
So
the
I
world.
wouldn't claim that as, but I'm not sure if I feel like a New Yorker.
Okay.
Oh, hi.
This
I'm a-
will be our last
okay.
question.
Well, this is actually a little more mundane. I'm a recently,
Well, then we'll have one more.
yes. I was recently the CTO of a medium-sized startup in New York, and I was wondering how you guys see the product development process changing in New York over the last 10 years and where you see it going. You know, about 10 years ago, people were very heavy on wireframes, top-down approach. Facebook shifted a lot of that to more of a hacker culture in terms of letting projects percolate up. More recently, there's more of a hybrid approach where a little bit from the top, a little bit from the bottom, I've seen mostly in New York. I was just wondering if you guys had thoughts on how you think product development should be done.
We didn't have a product group at HuffPost.
On purpose.
It started out this scrappiness thing. Since you are a CTO, if I were you, I wouldn't work anywhere that I didn't own design and product, and I would never own it in a silo. That's the way that I worked. Is I have a team around the world, and a brilliant guy in Antofagasta, Chile, could have an idea for HuffPost that was every bit as meaningful as Ken Lairs or Jonah Paredes. And so ideas came from anywhere, and in the team, and they were sorted by a combination of lowest hanging fruit. It could be an idea that everyone loved but would take a year to develop, and then we'd agonize over that. But if it's an idea that most people loved and could come fast and get someone working on it, this is not the standard either in the Valley or New York, but it's something that I feel passionately about. Is the metaphor I use is that when tech is treated wrong, it's like the waiter in a restaurant, and they tell you, bring exactly this, and then you bring exactly that, and you say, that waiter's awesome, he brought it, and it didn't take long. That's actually a very flawed way to work with technology. Instead, as CTO, you should be the chef, and they should be saying, you know, we want Asian food, maybe mixed with this, and you are working on the dishes. Because I used to be a lead developer, and when you're under the hood like that, you see shortcuts to things when you understand the business that nobody else can see.
Paul, I wonder if you could expand on that just briefly about the metaphor you used with me walking on the sidewalk the other day in terms of how we need to begin thinking about the learning of programming. How most people think it's about one subject, but you think it's about something else.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you who are, I think New York is 1,000 times more exciting today than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, or 12, I don't know how many years ago, I was CTO of a real estate finance company for Stephen Ross related. And that was like, on one side, huge data sets, and it was a public company of $4 billion market cap. So all that should have been exciting, but it was so fucking boring. And now New York is such a creative, awesome place. So if you're interested in picking this stuff up, the huge misconception is that programming is about math. People who get into programming because it's about math get very disappointed. They get very bored. They struggle like hell to find a job that's about math because the 95% of programming is language. So it's the shocking thing is that there was from many jobs ago, this girl who was working reception / answering customer service support, and she kept having ideas about the site. And I just gave her the books and said, just start reading here. I'll give you access to the service. She was a theater major, and she became one of the best programmers I've ever known because she got it. It's just language. It's just figure out how to, and unfortunately, most of life is just if, else, then. So it's a lot less glamorous, but finding really clever if-else-thens is something you don't have to be great at math for.
So a lot of people.
If this is a good question, this really will be the last. I thought the last question was not so mundane, by the way.
Yeah, I thought that was great.
Yeah, I thought it was a great question, too. Good strategy. Always spoken like a true technologist. Huh? I don't think we can deliver this product on time. Nice job.
So my question is, a lot of people have been talking about Silicon Alley and how, New York City is a great place for startups, and you talked about how all of the money kind of left Silicon Valley after the bubble burst. Do you think that startups can still be successful and exist in Silicon Valley, or do you think it really has moved over to Silicon Alley and now this is the place that tech startups need to be?
Is it over in California?
No.
Yeah,
No.
basically.
No, never.
California dreaming over.
No, that's the wrong way to think about it, where there's supposedly this competition between California and New York. And New York should not try to emulate Silicon Valley. It'll be very different. Silicon Valley will always have this incredible depth of technical and pure technology knowledge that we, quite frankly, don't have. We have pockets of it, but we don't have that core, and we shouldn't aspire to have that core. What we do have in New York is a great place to live, an incredibly diverse and cultured, I lived in Menlo Park. I can tell you, they roll up the pavements at 8 o'clock. It's not a place you want to be on the weekend, unless you want to take long bike rides, and that gets boring after a while. New York is obviously different. And New York is the fashion capital of the United States, or maybe even the world, finance, media, big commerce. So there's incredible domain knowledge here. And there's now a complete infrastructure to support the startup ecosystem, starting with shared workplaces, places like General Assembly. If you guys are looking for a place to hang your computer, go to General Assembly. They have educational programs at night.
Another educational model.
Yeah, exactly. Again, it's completely different.
That's right.
You've got accelerators and incubators, and you've got VCs. The city itself, I'm on the tech council of New York City, and we care about two things. One is education. The other one is broadband. We have 1 million kids in our school system, and we don't teach them how to code. We teach them Mandarin and Spanish, and God forbid, French. And we don't teach them coding, and they should be taught, they should have access to these lessons when they're 12 or 13, not after they leave school. Luckily, the school system has at least understood part of it. We just opened a software engineering academy close by, a few blocks from here, which is a high school. We think that we'll be able to have them in all the boroughs at some point, and then eventually that will then permeate through the whole rest of the school system. So there's a lot going on that is supportive of the startup ecosystem, and there might be another burp or another bubble, whatever, but that's going to stay.
Yeah, another bubble or not, I didn't ask you whether there's another bubble because you don't really care. Bubble or not, you're just going to keep investing, right? We've reached the end, which means that in true Inside the Actor Studio fashion, I have 5 questions for you, Eric, which you answer very spontaneously.
Oh my God. Red, no, blue.
Should you get a college degree? No, that's not one of them. All right, ready?
All right.
Ready? Uptown or downtown?
Downtown.
Who is the historical figure you most would have liked to work with?
Work with? Napoleon.
If you grew up in England, you could have said Churchill or something, huh? Okay, restaurant recommendation here in New York?
We went to a fantastic Japanese restaurant last night called Napa? No, Neta. Recommend Neta. It's on 8th Avenue and 4th Street or something. Fantastic.
Thankfully, Eric's wife is with us tonight. Eric, you're stranded on a desert island, and you can only have one application. What is it?
Twitter.
A lot of oohs and ahs. Okay, so Joseph Brodsky, the great Russian poet, once told a class that I was in that only 2 people in his life had accelerated him. The poet Anna Akhmatova and Auden, the poet Auden. He used the word accelerated. Who has accelerated you?
Belzev and Masayoshi Son.
Garage Hippeau, thank you so much for coming inside the Internet Garage. Let's thank Paul as well. Thanks, everybody. Very well done.